Great. Well, welcome. I'm glad you could join us. Let me do a little bit of a welcome and then we'll get started. All right. So hi, everybody. I'm Michael Landy in the Department of Mechanical Engineering, and this is our spring 2022 ER census talk. And so Eldon Census was for a long time was the department chair of mechanical engineering from the 40s to the 70s. And I have a professorship that's endowed in his name that allows us to do many things, this included. And so today we're lucky to have Jessica Fick from the University of Wisconsin, Platteville. And from talking to her, having her talk to us a little bit earlier today, some of the things are very similar to South Dakota Mines, a STEM-focused school, undergraduate teaching focused. One of the things that we've been talking about is entrepreneurial-minded learning, and how there's quite a network of schools across the United States that are bringing that kind of perspective to an array of engineering programs. And so Dr. Fick is part of a group at the University of Wisconsin, Platteville, who joined the Keen Network. Kern Family Foundation supports a network of a couple dozen schools across the United States about bringing entrepreneurship-minded learning to the classroom. And so she'll talk a little bit about her experience with that. She's an undergraduate alumnus of mechanical engineering at University of Wisconsin at Platteville, and now she went to Johns Hopkins, did some technical research about mechanics, and now she's back at her alma mater, among other things, leading the senior design efforts. So she's going to talk to us today about entrepreneurship-minded learning, and probably how that's a mouthful, and how she's brought that to the senior capstone design experience. So welcome, Jessica.
Thank you. Yeah, so just to start out, thank you for the lovely introduction. I am at UW Platteville and an alum, so it's really interesting being back at a program that I started with. And I've been the senior design coordinator for the college. So I did want to talk about senior design today. A lot of what Micah relayed about UW Platteville, very true. We are a regional public access institution. So our students are many times a first generation student. We're very much teaching focused, and the campus is STEM focused as well. And then also mentioned that we became a partner relatively recently in 2020, but our first contact with Keen and entrepreneurially minded learning was in 2018. One of the things that we got our gold star for, and I had to share, is that we had the record number of members on Engineering Unleashed. So if you haven't joined that, if you don't have a profile on there, highly recommend that you get on there and start looking through some of the resources. So if you're very interested in this, that's a great place to start. One of the things that really drew UW Platteville to the entrepreneurial mindset was not necessarily the name. I know I kind of joked that the last session that it's really hard to say, but it just made sense to us that we're teaching our students about technical skills, that skill set piece, but we still want them to be able to take a step back and be able to approach the problem. And so it's that mindset piece that really spoke to us, that we want our students to understand the broader context and the broader impacts of the decisions that they're making. And that comes through being curious and being able to find the information that you need. ABET calls that lifelong learning. We want our students to make connections between the different classes that they're taking, not just finishing the exam and moving on to the next thing. And we want them to be able to create value for their future organizations. And so how they do that and being intentional about, fostering those skills is really important. So that was the first thing that drew us to it, was this thought process and that skill set plus mindset, and then that community that I was first exposed to when I went to the first Keen National Convention in 2018. I'm sure you've all seen the Keen framework. The next layer on it is that Keen shows you how to do this. Some of the pieces from ABET of lifelong learning and broader impacts, and some of that language can be a little bit nebulous. And so how you do it, well, here are the things that break that down. Lifelong learning relates to curiosity, it relates to opportunity. And so I'm sure you've seen those 3 C's, but you've got this whole framework with things that help you accomplish that. So that's one of those big benefits. And I wanted to add one last piece to this. It's something that has really helped us on our campus, is that this framework is giving us the how, and the community is giving us lots of examples of every single one of these. But sometimes it helps to break it down even further. And so I wanted to put out here, this is something that we borrowed from the community, is Ohio Northern's expanded Keen outcomes. And I'm happy to share where this is located on Engineering Unleashed, but this breaks down even further. So for example, with curiosity, I know this is hard to read, so let's go a little bit closer. Curiosity, it's a lot easier to talk about how do we get our students to ask more questions, to ask better questions, as opposed to trying to develop curiosity. So that is why we got involved. All right, so the topic for today is how entrepreneurial mindset got infused into senior design and how that made some big changes for how our students were leaving the university after that capstone experience. I will say that senior design is naturally entrepreneurial minded learning. You have these real projects, and we're forcing students to use stuff from other classes. They're making connections. They have to gather information because it's something they haven't seen before. So they have to be curious. And then they're trying to create value for someone. Someone cares about the answer. And so we could easily just say, it's EM and walk away. But there's lots of other opportunities to infuse things intentionally and to drive those messages home with our students. So our senior design program has evolved quite a bit in the last 5 to 10 years. And so this is sort of the overview of the changes that have occurred. Before 2015, it's probably the typical, we've got this mix of campus projects and community projects, and students are given a choice between them. Some industry, but more campus and community. And so we started seeing some changes as we moved into having a coordinator that brought in projects and having a sponsorship program. And so I'll talk through those a little bit. I started teaching senior design in 2016, so this is where I step in. And then we started attending Keen events. So the national conference gave us a flavor of what is EM, and we started to shift our thinking and how we approach senior design, and then started revamping and redesigning things to include that as we move forward. The last change, if we have time, I'll talk a little bit about our most recent thing that we moved towards that has really helped us go to that next level, which is our collaborative framework. Okay, I know you all have different models for senior design. Just to give you context, ours is a 3-credit course with 2 credits of lecture and 1 credit of lab. The majority of our disciplines are semester long as opposed to year long. And we do have 6 different discipline specific courses. So mechanical, industrial, civil, and enviro together. EP is pretty unique to us, engineering, physics. And then we have a sustainability and renewable energy systems senior design, and they're all semester long. And then we have 2 disciplines that have year-long, software and electrical. And so I'm going to try and keep in that semester long time frame or construct, but they're pretty similar, right? Teams work on industry or community or campus projects, and the lecture tends to be design process, professional skills, ethics, things like that. And I'm sure yours has some of these similar features as well. So that is our starting point. Our first change to the general run of the business is a senior design coordinator. So 2015, we had a full-time person come in, and their job was to start bringing in different projects, build connections with industry. They tended to have a lot of inventors and entrepreneurs, just their particular background. But this is the first time where we're starting to bring in people and projects that there was a financial stake in the solution, and students had had to kind of navigate some of the inventor and entrepreneur, their particular preferences and their ideas. A lot of times they were really vested in their ideas. And if you've worked with an inventor before, you know that they need a lot of coaxing to try and get into something if it's not working. But these really stretched the skills of our students, keeping them in those disciplines by themselves. A lot of times, there was an electrical portion of the mechanical project, or the industrial one needed to do more design than they're accustomed to. And that continued even further as we added our sponsorship program. So this is 2016, right when I was starting to teach the class. And we did make it voluntary for the programs to participate. So Emmy started pretty naturally, and then it started to build out. But we had this full-time person who was the coordinator that then shifted to a corporate relations piece. And we had a donation associated with it. So this was one of those things that we knew that the money coming in was going to help us make the program better, give us more support for prototyping. But we had an unexpected byproduct of that sponsorship program. And that was that we ended up having a stronger commitment from our industry partners. There was more pressure to have a good outcome, maybe from the managers or other people surrounding the project because of the financial donation. And so there were better report outs to them. And if there was a roadblock, they tended to get rid of it right away. And so the students got more of that fast pace environment that they would normally have in industry. So this continued to expand the breadth of projects. But we started to see that there was no pure ME, no pure IE or software, like there was no pure one discipline project. And if they were very rare. And most of the projects coming in needed some input from more than one discipline. And so I liked to show off some of our projects. These are all mechanical projects from one semester that, we've got a cookie machine that dispenses cookie ingredients automatically for a STEM demonstrator. We've got a cookie wrapping machine for our dining services. We've got an optics train that's for a place that makes rifle scopes. We've got an illumination station for a restaurant to have sound and light and charging and a heater in it. And then we have a solar bench. And I would argue that all of these projects could have been done by a different discipline, right? This illumination station, we needed an electrical on it. This optics train, our engineering physics students with their heavier physics background and optics would have been really important on this project. The solar bench, we could have needed a civil engineer to deal with building codes and structural codes. And so this started to become more and more of the conversation, to the point where we were looking at, how do we handle these real world projects? This became our industry sponsored dilemma. And it seemed like a really big thing to take on. How can we have students in different classes with different deliverables and different timelines, all trying to work together? So this became an academic problem. How do we solve this? And as I started to ask questions and talk to people, we realized that there really weren't that many differences. And so the lecture covered the same things. The project milestones may be called something different. They may be plus or minus a couple of days of deadline, but they were pretty much the same. And so it was very easy for us to create a different course that allowed the students to mingle and mix and be on those interdisciplinary teams. So we now have an interdisciplinary senior design class that allows for those projects. And that was a big win. Sorry. All right. So our next change really came from the entrepreneurially minded learning. And that's why we're here today, is to talk about EM. And so I put up here the learning objectives for senior design, again, because it's just a really natural fit. The same time we're developing this interdisciplinary course, this is starting to come into focus. The lecture content is evolving, and we're trying to get more intentional about all those hidden learning objectives that we know are in senior design. And so I came back from training and KNC, and I was like, we've got to do some things. And so the first lecture that I revamped was ideation. It seems like such an easy change. And I think of how boring it was before, and I'm comfortable saying that because this was that many years ago. I've evolved, but there's more than one method of brainstorming. We can talk about more than just quantity over quality. And we can talk about how some brainstorming methods are more appropriate for one type of project or one set of personalities than another. And so this was a very easy change. The second thing I did, the first half of the semester is very much the design process. The second half was, design for X, design for manufacturing, design for the environment. And so I went and dug into our design for sustainability lecture. And went, this took some of the stuff from that ICE training, from that first EM training, and started to look at, well, how can we give them a connection to something? So we had them do a jigsaw, which if you're not familiar, you take your team and you have them go out and find information about different aspects. And then they have to be an expert on their team on that topic. And so they went out, learned about sustainability, brought it back to their team, and then they had to design a solution. And we asked them to include sustainable features and in their design and call them out. So you can see in the picture, the students are writing out from their design, what is it that's incorporating what they learned. And then of course, as they're presenting, we start talking about some of more of the EM connections. Is this marketable? Is it something we could sell? What would you say is the value proposition? What are people getting out of this by adopting the solution? And so those were both two very early changes. Another thing that I loved about that beginning part of the semester was opportunities to just use simple visual things to drive home points that are really important. And I stole this from the training that they gave us this handful of Legos in the training and said, build a duck. And that was the only thing they said. And so the students do this now. We give them this set of 7 Legos and they play with them for a couple of minutes. And then I put this picture up on the screen and say, well, who designed the duck I wanted? And nobody designed the duck I wanted because I didn't give them enough information. Is it standing? Is it sitting? All those things. So this is one of those really clear illustrations of you need to be able to ask questions. You need to clearly define the problem. Otherwise, you might not give the sponsor or your contact something that they want, or you might not fully understand the problem. They may not fully understand the problem. They may need you to ask some probing questions. So user-friendly, what does that mean? Right? You have to ask questions. It needs to fit into this space because it's going to go here in the factory. Well, does it have to go there in the factory? Are there other things that could be moved to give more space? Right? So you have to ask lots of questions in order to get to the right constraints. All right, another example, and this is one of those pieces that I really enjoy, and is just right on the nose EM content, is we added these couple of lectures to get at opportunity recognition and then also creating value. But this piece of opportunity recognition also talks about innovation, because we hear about innovation so much that we're talking about it in lecture and we're just, intentionally covering it as opposed to having it be in the background. And one of the things that we talk about in this lecture is that we really want the students to understand that they look at the world with a different perspective as engineers, as technical people, that they're going to see problems and they're going to know how to solve them, and that they should keep track of these things. They should have a notebook that writes them down, either for their personal life, that they have an idea that they want to solve a problem in their personal life, but in their organization as well. And then that leads in really easily or really naturally into creating value. And so we spend a lecture on opportunity recognition and how to do that. We talk about brainstorming, and then we follow it up with creating value that talks about, well, now you've found an opportunity. How do you decide if it's going to give someone some value such that it's something that we want to market and is something that people will actually buy? So this lecture looks at how they're getting value propositions in their everyday life through advertising, through marketing. And we start to identify, you know, who do you think their stakeholders were? What were the pain points they were trying to address? What value are they adding? And how are they conveying that with the pitch or the commercial that you're watching? And once they get a little practice with that, we challenge them to make their own poster, their own ad for their senior design project. So in the picture here, we have a team that is working on a system to automatically move the fence for a cattle grazing area. So it's got a robot or a remote controlled cart that moves the fence around. And so it's moving the fence so you don't have to. And they're in that process of identifying that stakeholder and sort of that pain point that's already conveyed there. I think one of the last big changes or in the lecture content was the addition of a lot of guest speakers. We do have in the second half of the semester, we'll have out of those 16 lectures, we'll have half of them be guest speakers. And that gives the students an opportunity to hear from somebody else. That reinforces some of the things that we're talking about that maybe just don't mean as much until they hear it again from someone else from outside. So we have people come in and talk about team dynamics and conflict resolution at the very beginning of the semester. I usually have alumni come in and talk about their career path and sort of reinforce why these things are important. We have a former judge who is also has a civil engineering degree come in and talk about ethics and liability so that he's got examples of where he's seen the work of an engineer, you know, blend in with the work of a lawyer or with the law system. And then another interesting one is in uncertainty in engineering. We have a faculty member that this was her PhD work, and the idea that uncertainty and how do you decide what's the best solution may not be clear right away, and that you have more uncertainty when you start your career versus later on. And so just getting students to think about that and how uncomfortable it feels because they don't know what direction to go. So through all these changes, we've made the lecture more active. There's more things where the students are interacting and giving opinions and really talking through some of it. We've brought in things that are connecting them to the stakeholder for their project, but then also future stakeholders. And we're getting them to think about their careers and how they're going to make decisions. And really, we want to bust them out of this classroom mindset where they're just thinking about the next deadline and the next grade, especially when they're in senior design. All right. The last change that I wanted to talk about with our senior design program is a pretty big shift in the model. And this was inspired by having all these changes and bringing in some different EM pieces. We started out with having an instructor teach that lecture, the 2 classes a week, and then they had a lab section which followed the teams through their projects. And it really meant that there were only 2 or 3 people in our department that had done anything with senior design, that they were mentoring 12, 13 teams every semester. And it was kind of overwhelming. And it also meant that you had people, there were only so many people that were comfortable with it. And so we shifted to keeping someone in the lecture so that no one needed to re-prep all those lecture topics. And then having the lab section be a different faculty member that was going to follow the project and really look at the progress and work with the sponsor, et cetera. So we have the lecture coordinator, which has been me, and we're starting to get other people involved with that. But then we have a bunch of faculty mentors that have those lab sections. And so now we have 13 people in the department that are involved with senior design versus 2 or 3. And they don't have 12 projects. I can't imagine doing that anymore. Now it's 3 at a time. So that Friday or that faculty mentor session, we call our weekly progress report. And this changed a little bit how the students were reporting out each week. We saw value in having teams interact with each other and being exposed to other teams' presentations and their problems. And we pitched this to them, like, you're going to have your own technical challenge that you're going to work through for the semester, but you also are going to get exposed to 2 more technical challenges, and you're going to help them get through it too. And so 3 teams meet at the same time, and they take turns presenting within this, section of 12. And the faculty mentor, that person that has that lab section, is only there to facilitate. They're not there to grill them with questions and see what they're doing next. The teams are leading it. So they present their progress, and then it turns into open discussion with their peers. And what I found when I first started in senior design was that it was really difficult to feel like an expert in all of the different topics. And this really takes some of the burden away, that the students in the class have lots of different backgrounds, lots of different expertise and perspectives that really come in handy, for lack of a better term, as they're discussing these projects. That one with the cattle moving system, that moving dairy fence, some of the students will have experience on a farm and will have some perspective of what's going to work. Maybe the train just isn't going to make sense for the solution that they're going down that path. Maybe a student has experience in the shop and they're able to add that. By making it their responsibility to add their perspective and their experiences as part of this discussion, the projects turn out better, and it's much richer feedback than it just one single person. And so those faculty mentors, as I mentioned, end up being the facilitators, but they provide some technical mentoring. They still meet with the teams and they meet with the sponsors so that they can still nudge them. But for the most part, on that formal period for the week, they're just trying to facilitate and make sure the discussion continues, but they're keeping the teams on track and they're getting rid of roadblocks and conflicts and things like that. Okay, having that shift in the model really opened the door, and I'm bringing together this shift in the model and also our interdisciplinary course, that we saw an opportunity, especially with the pandemic hitting in 2020, that, why are we delivering this lecture content to every single class separately? Why don't we combine our efforts and bring the students together? And so this collaborative framework allows us to share lectures with the different disciplines. And so you can see we have 4 different groups coming together for the different lectures. And then the faculty mentors are assigned based on which discipline you're in and which projects they are, right? Mechanical engineering is quite broad. So like if it's a thermofluids project, it gets a thermofluids faculty member and things like that. It also makes it really easy to do those interdisciplinary projects because everyone has the same lecture and they have the same project deliverables. They're all named the same thing. They all are due on the same dates. And so that has made that question much, much simpler. All right. So to look back on all these changes, and they all are connected to that entrepreneurial mindset. Some of the effects that we've seen in the students, they are able to articulate the value they're adding, and that comes through that one lecture, but it's also reinforced through their poster presentation, their final presentation, right? They're asked to continue that information and to refine that value proposition. They're a lot more comfortable presenting, and they see it as an opportunity for feedback, especially with that Friday weekly progress report that we have where they're presenting to other teams. They're also coached as part of that weekly progress report to ask questions because it's part of that discussion. And so we talk a lot about critical listening, because if you're not listening carefully enough, you're not going to be able to ask questions, make comments, or add any sort of that feedback to that discussion. And then they're also able to make connections with their other disciplines. They're sharing that lecture space, they're sharing labs because they'll have interdisciplinary projects mixed in on a particular weekly progress report session. And so that interdisciplinary aspect is really important. And it's not just for the teams that are on the mixed teams. One of the challenging things about having more people involved is that any changes that we make, it's difficult for us to make sure that we have all of that EM content that we've evolved and we put it in there. How do we make sure that it continues? And how do we make sure that it's still being covered the way that we want it to be covered so that everybody gets the right content and the right objectives? And so we do have a process for onboarding the new faculty as they start being a faculty mentor in senior design. And that has, been proofed and used multiple times now, so it has evolved. We also check in as a faculty group once a week. So just because I'm the one in the lecture section doesn't mean that the other faculty that are involved, that they need to know what's going on in lecture as well. They need to know what announcements I've given to the students, what nudges. And so we talk about that every week. And then I also drop into those sessions, those weekly progress reports, to help guide any of the new ones, especially to make sure that we have that open discussion and that we're reinforcing that culture with the students. Right. So bringing back that outline of the different changes that we've made in senior design, sponsorship, one of the things that I helped with in the change management piece is really helped with buy-in for the rest of the college. This is something that we're still working on. There's still disciplines that are resistant to that, but in mechanical engineering and the disciplines that have joined along with it, we've really seen some differences. And one of them is that higher buy-in from our sponsors. But other things are just, we have so many new and interesting projects and the students are excited about them. The connections with industry have bred other projects and other programs and other opportunities. Team teaching really helped as we were going to start making some changes in the lecture section, putting in that EM content, as well as changing the model. We had to bring in key collaborators, right? We had to bring in people that were willing to be along for the ride, be part of the change process. And so I team taught with someone that I knew was going to be open to doing some of these things. And then once it's established, it's easy for other people to join in. I mentioned at the beginning, have some release time for organizing senior design and handling some of the academic changes of the senior design. So that's been very helpful. It also gives me some, not just time, but it gives me that responsibility and balancing with some authority to push some things through. But it really has been a collaborative effort in making sure that everyone has the pieces they need as we went to that collaborative framework. And then finally, as far as collaboration, as we've made these changes, I mentioned it's all of these faculty mentors, and they're coming in. Some of them have never done it before, and we've made that entry point into senior design much, much lower. Right? They're not worried about going to get projects. That comes in through the coordinator. We're not worried about, redeveloping the course. It's already there. The framework's there. And so the faculty are supported and the projects are supplied. And so it's really easy for someone to come in and start working with teams. All right. Anybody have any questions?
Questions, folks? I've got one. Could you, excuse me, Jessica, could you elaborate a little bit on the faculty onboarding training, just logistically, how you do that when you bring new faculty on board for your senior design?
Yeah, so our onboarding is we get together, we have an hour long with our new faculty, and we welcome to have faculty that have already done this come into the fold. But for the most part, we're looking at new faculty to run them through what the semester looks like. So what are the different milestones that the students are going to go through with their project, and where are they typically at this stage, and sort of those best practices of what to expect. But then we also cover what is the EM content, why we're doing it. And so that's those two functions in that onboarding session.
So is that before the semester begins?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so I typically meet with new people if it's going to be the fall semester where they usually start new people. I usually meet with them before they leave for the summer to be like, you don't have to prep anything, because that's usually the first question. And then we meet with them right before the semester starts.
And when you say new people to senior design, are you talking about new junior faculty or established faculty that are new to teaching senior design?
You know, we've welcomed faculty into it now at this stage that are brand new, that are senior. When we first started, we were selectively picking people that we knew would hit the ground running. And now that it's established, bringing in a new person or two at a time every fall hasn't been an issue. So, I mean, we have people that it's their first semester, this semester in senior design, that they've gotten brought in. So, and they're doing a great job.
Questions for the room?
I have a question. The last of the 3 C's is character. You do anything specifically and explicitly with character? And so what kind of things do you do?
Yeah, so, you know, character pieces having to do with developing that passion for your career and professional development, right? Those things are part of it, and part of those alumni stories speak to how do you make these decisions? How do you decide where your career is going next? I've got to pull up the framework to remind myself some of the other ones really quick. Oh yeah, ethical practices. I knew there was another one. Yeah, so we talk about ethics with that former judge, and he's also a civil engineer by trade. And then we follow that up the lecture right period after that. We talk about not just being in an ethical dilemma, but then how do we handle the conversations? So if you've ever gone through Crucial Conversations, either training or read the book, that's what we base that next lecture on, is how to handle a very difficult conversation, and we have them practice.
Do you do any work with the psychology people? Do you have IO psych people and industrial engineering who might work with you?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear it.
Do you work with any of the psychology people on the character development? Perhaps the IO psych people?
So we don't have psychology people working on senior design, but we do have this character piece that we are working on with our advising. So how do we give our faculty advisors tools to develop some of these as they meet with the students for that? And that group has somebody from psychology in it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I have a question. So how about the students' feedback on your EM approach? Did you measure or did you do any surveys if they like this approach or not?
Yeah, so it's not a survey of comparison, but we do survey them on the exit. And so we do see that, you know, what's your comfort level with presenting, right? We ask those types of questions. And so we're seeing that increase. We don't have any comparative data because we didn't ask it before. That's always one of those things with assessment. You got to think of putting those surveys out before.
Thank you.
And this is Jason Ash. I had a couple questions. The first one for the interdisciplinary senior design course. Do you have like a lead faculty in each program to handle the course assessment for each program for ABET? Because the programs end up going through the accreditation process.
Yeah, so ABET was one of those concerns as we went to that interdisciplinary course. And we usually have an instructor of record that is associated with each discipline. And so like when they sign up for lecture, they'll have me as their instructor, but it'll also have as a co-instructor, somebody from their discipline. And we've worked that out as far as it counts. We have dean's points here. We give them 1 dean's point, which doesn't mean much, but it just shows that their name is on that course, and they have some responsibilities as far as turning in grades at the end of the semester. But we know that they're not preparing lectures and giving lectures. They're just the person on record, and then they handle the ABET assessment.
All right, and then the second question with the more industry-sponsored projects, how are you handling the NDAs and intellectual property from those?
Yes, that was a big process. And I think we started it and then said, okay, pause, come on back. We've got some things we've got to take care of. Non-disclosure agreements, we tend to use the ones from the company that we're working with. And then we just check them over before we hand them out to the students to make sure that they're not signing on behalf of the university and that they're not signing something that's going to affect their future career, that there's not a do not compete or something like that in the clause of it. Intellectual property, the university does not retain intellectual property. And I know that's different at every school. And so we don't see a lot of problems working with inventors and other entities. It's very common to ask our students to sign a non-disclosure, but waiving IP rights and things like that, we get one a semester out of the 75 projects that we're doing.
Right, and I think it's similar here. Usually when we are collaborating with a company, there's an overall NDA between the company and the university that covers all of us faculty. But then there's an additional agreement between the company and the students, and we have our office that kind of assists with that as well as the faculty. So I was just curious how that's handled on your end.
Yep, we have those issues, and there's always something new, right? We've been doing this for 6 years and there's still something new that'll pop up. Last semester, I had a team that they could not get the NDA situated. And we have a semester long, so it's a 16-week semester, and week 5, they were still trying to get the NDA figured out so that the team could just get the information to start the project. And we had to say time out and give the team a different project. And that was really challenging. That was the first time we had ever had that much trouble. And so lesson learned, and have a contingency set up for that now.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
With your history, Jessica, have you seen a marked improvement in the project quality at the end of the semester?
So that sponsorship program, we saw such a step change with how vested the sponsors were before that time. And part of it is how we were handling it too. It wasn't just the sponsorship funds, but like the sponsor would check in, like the students would ask if they had a critical question, but there wasn't this sort of weekly report out or bi-weekly report out with the sponsor. And now that's really common, right? The majority of our teams they have a weekly meeting with the faculty mentor where they're presenting to 2 other teams. They have a check-in with the sponsor. They have a weekly meeting, just the team. So they're spending quite a few hours doing the things that professionals do. Go to meetings, decide who's going to do what, go do it, come back together, do the next piece, and so forth.
So you obviously see some individual improvements in just the students and how they operate, but the actual projects themselves you would feel has been significantly improved.
The outcomes
Right.
of the projects. And we're pushing them. And I realized at some point that I was probably pushing my students harder than a colleague or 2, right? Like it's just different cultures of people. And I've had to tone it down a little bit, and then we pull the other people to get into that happy medium. But by having this framework where everybody's on the same schedule, right, they're getting pushed along with the same nudges.
One additional question, if you don't mind, is it when you're doing your weekly progress reports, is there a project management framework that you're following each of the teams, or is it really ad hoc per team, or how do you approach that?
Yeah, they are encouraged to use PowerPoint. Before we started that encouraging, they tended to be just sort of like, well, we didn't do anything this week. They were terrible. But giving them a little bit of guidance on what we wanted to see. At the beginning of the semester, they're told to first have a slide or two of what did you do last week, so we remember. What did you accomplish this week? What are the points of discussion? What are the roadblocks? What do you need to talk about today? And then what's your plans for next week? And so we give them some guidance, but they're not following, like, this is the standard report out.
Okay, so you're not enforcing an agile environment or a
Mm-mm.
waterfall driven project management philosophy. You're
Nope.
just basically, it's fairly free form from
Mhm.
your standpoint. So at the end, you effectively have you got a PowerPoint, you've got some more formal reports, and you've got presentations and the actual product at the end of the semester. Is that fair?
Yep.
Okay.
And those weekly progress report slides, because of the, open format, they are ones that they can build on and put into their formal presentations for the end of the semester.
Thank you.
Anything else, folks?
I have a question. I think you mentioned at the beginning, were some of the departments on a 2-semester senior design and some are on a 1?
Yeah, so we
How do you
have,
handle that?
so software engineering is off on their own, and they have a
Okay.
year-long senior design, and they have technical content that is in the class. So out of all of software engineering, very specific types of projects that are in their senior design because of the technical content.